Asian markets wavered Monday as traders prepared for what could be a decisive week in global economic sense, again overshadowed by Donald Trump's disruptive trade policies, with the Federal Reserve widely expected to cut interest rates by 25 basis points on Wednesday. Uncertainty fueled by Trump's escalating tariff war is sending shockwaves across financial markets. The Fed's move is about managing prosperity. It's a desperate attempt to stabilize an economy destabilized by aggressive trade measures. Asian equities reflected the tension, trading unevenly as investors weighed the fallout. The labor market is softening, and while inflation hasn't spiked dramatically, that's largely because Trump's tariffs have slowed overall economic activity. Yet on Sunday, Trump called for an even bigger rate cut, ignoring that his own policies forced the Fed into this defensive position. It's the equivalent of an arsonist demanding faster action from the fire department. The trade war has become an unmitigated disaster. Since returning to office, Trump has launched sweeping tariffs that have spiraled into conflicts with multiple countries. The numbers highlight the scale. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods now average over 57, covering 100 of imports. China has retaliated with tariffs averaging 32.6 on all American exports. That's an increase of nearly 37 percentage points since Trump's second term began, more than double the hikes of his entire first administration. The cost to Americans is staggering. Analysts estimate these tariffs amount to an average tax increase of $13,300 per U.S. household in 2025, making them the largest tax hike since 1993, outpacing increases under both Obama and George H.W. Bush. And the damage extends well beyond China. Canada and Mexico have been hit with 25 tariffs, while allies like India have faced steep punitive measures too. This isn't sound economic policy, it's economic warfare that's weighing heavily on families' markets and America's global standing.
Has now said that he put a 50% tariff on India because they are buying oil from Russia. That's not an easy thing to do. That's a big deal, and it causes a rift with India, is what he has said. Meanwhile, United States has also told G7 countries to join them in imposing tariffs on countries purchasing oil from Russia. This is the breaking news input we are getting in for you. CNN News 18 Sanjay Suri joins us live this morning. Sanjay, very good morning to you. Trump has always been a transactional leader, but these comments coming from him despite India repeatedly defending itself.
In the latest move, Trump has announced a 50% tariff on India over its purchase of Russian oil, while pressuring G7 nations to adopt similar penalties. This marks a sharp escalation in the use of trade policy as a geopolitical weapon, with the European Union also facing threats of heavy tariffs.
Has now come in, and once again, it's Donald Trump who is in the eye of the news. The American president has urged the NATO allies to adopt sweeping measures to pressurize Moscow, including imposing 50 to 100% of tariffs on China until the Russia-Ukraine war is over. In a lengthy post on Truth Social, Donald Trump addressed all the NATO countries and the world and said that he has said that Washington was prepared to move forward with major sanctions on Russia, but only if European partners halted the purchase of Russian oil and joined in a coordinated action. Remember, he has always been speaking about the fact that Russian oil only has been, kind of sponsoring and funding war against Ukraine. Akanksha is now joining us on the phone line. Akanksha, each day, Donald Trump makes it very clear, you buy Russian oil, you're going to have to pay the price.
Trump is now insisting that NATO allies end all purchases of Russian oil, or face tariffs between 50% and 100%. In doing so, he is effectively holding the Western alliance hostage. threatening economic warfare unless they comply with his demands on Russian energy. He has invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify what many see as outright economic coercion. The deeper concern is his use of trade policy as a tool for unrelated agendas. Trump has argued that these tariffs are needed to fight drug trafficking and immigration, turning economic measures into leverage for political goals. This isn't trade strategy, it's economic hostage-taking.
Where nobody knows what the tariff rates will be next month, let alone, a year, 2 years from now. It's just complete, utter chaos. It's sort of the whims of the president, and then the question of whether the courts even allow him to do what he's doing, which wreaks havoc with business. Any investment a business makes right now has a good chance of turning out to be a really bad investment because the tariff rate is...
A Nobel Prize-winning economist recently noted that while traditional tariffs have predictable downsides, Trump's unpredictable approach creates unprecedented chaos for businesses. The real harm lies not only in the tariffs themselves, but in the uncertainty surrounding future rates. Companies investing today have no idea what tariffs will look like next month or next year, making rational planning nearly impossible. The global response has been swift. Countries are no longer quietly accepting Trump's economic pressure. China has struck back with its own tariff hikes, while several nations have rolled out retaliatory measures. Canada even imposed counter-tariffs before later scaling some of them back.
We're looking at in Mexico is not really negotiating a new deal, partly because Canada still has both the CUSMA agreement that includes Mexico, but also the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes both Canada and Mexico as parties. So there's already a significant amount of market access. What we're likely to be focused on is Canada and Mexico aligning on strategy in terms of handling the American disruptions and handling bilateral trade between the two parties that are separated by this kind of buffer state of the United States, because there is still a reasonably large amount of trade that happens bilaterally between the two countries.
With the trade that does already happen between these two countries, how high would you say the stakes are for this particular meeting?
So I think for the stakes for the trading relationship, probably not the highest. Again, because there is a relatively strong relationship already between the two different free trade agreements. I think the biggest issue here is going to be how the two countries coalesce and whether or not they can agree to kind of work together in terms of negotiating with the American government, especially on the sectoral sanctions. I mean, the auto market in particular is one that is very heavily diversified between the three different countries, with one vehicle often crossing a dozen, 24 times between the three before it's...
The damage to relationships is clear. Trade analysts report that instead of pursuing new agreements, Canada and Mexico are now focused on coordinating strategies to withstand U.S. disruptions, strengthening their cooperation, especially in the auto sector, where supply chains cross borders multiple times during production. The European Union has postponed unveiling new sanctions, waiting to see how Trump's trade war develops. Markets reflect the uncertainty. Asian equities are swinging because investors can't predict his next move. Hong Kong, Singapore, and Jakarta posted early gains, but mostly on hopes of Federal Reserve support rather than confidence in U.S. policy. Seoul hit a record high only after officials scrapped a measure that would have hurt local investors, an effort to shield themselves from Washington's chaos. Shanghai, meanwhile, slipped as data pointed to further weakness in China's economy. But this isn't a sign of fragility, it's a deliberate pivot. China is shifting economic activity away from reliance on the United States, which explains slower growth in retail sales and industrial output. Australia's markets also tell a cautionary story. ANZ Bank, one of the country's major lenders, fell after agreeing to a record fine, but the wider market weakness reflects broader concerns about Trump's erratic trade agenda and the risks it poses to global stability. What makes all this more striking is that Trump continues to insist his tariff war is succeeding, even as its ripple effects undermine allies, unsettle markets.
Make this one your first one?
Because I think it's important for the future of my children and my grandchildren and the climate and women's rights. So for me, this is a very important moment for me and for the world that we recognise that this man is not helping the future of our climate and our country and our children.
He is the leader of one of our closest allies.
Yep.
We should be engaging with him, yes?
I think it's very difficult to engage with the tyrant, and I think if you capitulate to all his demands and we're not going to get very far, and we're just appeasing a monster, really.
Okay, Amanda, thank you.
Public opposition to Trump's policies has exploded, with protesters flooding the streets in numbers not seen before. One demonstrator summed up the anger, calling his trade agenda the work of a tyrant, destroying the future for our children through reckless economic warfare. Despite the backlash, Trump insists a deal with China is close. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent even claims the talks are becoming more productive. But this is the same playbook Trump used in his first term: create a crisis with tariffs, then take credit for fixing the very mess he caused. This week's negotiations in Madrid between China and the US are framed around a November deadline for a tariff pause. In reality, it's theater. Trump thrives on artificial deadlines to paint himself as a dealmaker when he's just patching up self-inflicted damage. The TikTok dispute shows the chaos. Clearly, Trump is using a social media app as leverage in trade negotiations. That's not strategy, it's hostage-taking. At the same time, China is hitting back with investigations into US semiconductor companies. Instead of weakening Beijing, Trump's trade war is driving China to double down on self-reliance and shield its critical industries. China has dropped an antitrust probe into Google while intensifying pressure on Nvidia by banning domestic tech firms from buying Nvidia's AI chips and accusing the company of monopoly violations. Beijing is building walls around its tech sector in direct response to Trump's aggression. American companies are also caught in the crossfire. Bristol Myers Squibb just sold off 60% of a pharmaceutical venture in China, squeezed by tariffs, and Trump's push to force investment back into the US. Farmers are among the hardest hit. Export markets have collapsed, costs are rising, and the administration is scrambling to funnel tariff revenue into bailout programs. It's like burning down your own house, then bragging about buying a tent with the insurance money. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is being forced into damage control. A rate cut expected Wednesday is designed to offset Trump's economic shocks, but monetary policy can't fully counter destructive trade wars. Central banks in Canada, Britain, and Japan are also being forced to react, coordinating efforts to calm markets destabilized by US tariffs. The timing couldn't be worse. Trump's tariffs are fueling inflation and uncertainty. While the Fed is trying to support growth, it's like trying to steer a car while someone else yanks the wheel. Most damaging of all, America's credibility as the world's free trade leader is eroding. Instead of championing open markets, Trump has turned the US into a global economic bully, threatening both allies and rivals with tariffs.
I mean, we built the world trading system, and I say we because that's the United States. The US created this thing, which is a system of rules and laws. We've just ripped up a whole system of trading agreements, a system that we built over 90 years, because this really goes back to FDR. You don't put that back together, even if the next president says, okay, my first act is to undo everything Trump did. The United States will never be trusted again. We used to be a country where if we made an agreement, that was an agreement. I mean, I was in the Reagan administration working on trade things, and there would be meetings in which some proposal would be floated, and the guy from the U.S. Trade Representative's office would say that would be GATT illegal, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which binds this, and end of discussion. In the Reagan administration, if it was a violation of our international agreements, we didn't do it. This administration doesn't care. They don't even try to justify violating these agreements.
Economic experts are warning that Trump's tariff war may cause lasting damage to America's international reputation. For nearly a century, the US built the global trading system, and in just a few years, Trump has torn it apart. Even if a future president reverses course, trust in America's commitments has been shattered. Countries are already adapting. China and India are deepening economic ties. The European Union is seeking new trade partners. Even Canada and Mexico, traditionally America's closest allies, are diversifying to reduce dependence on US markets. Trump's claim that tariffs make interest rate cuts possible reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of economics. Tariffs don't create stability, they create volatility that forces rate cuts. It's like saying breaking windows is good for business because it keeps glassmakers busy. The data underscores the failure. US GDP forecasts are being revised down. Inflation expectations are climbing. Unemployment is set to rise. These are not signs of strength, they're proof of policy failure. Meanwhile, America's targets are moving on. China is pivoting toward domestic consumption, and non-US trade. India is expanding into new markets. Instead of bowing to Washington's pressure, the EU is reinforcing internal trade while looking outward for fresh partnerships. Rather than making America great, Trump is accelerating America's economic decline by weaponizing trade. He is driving countries to build systems that exclude the US, weakening the very influence America once relied on. The Federal Reserve's expected rate cut on Wednesday may calm markets temporarily, but it cannot repair the deeper damage. Central banks can inject liquidity, but they cannot restore trust in a country that uses trade as a weapon. Across Asia, markets swing wildly as investors brace for more chaos. The truth is clear: Trump's tariff war has been an economic disaster. The Fed's intervention is not a signal of strength, it's an emergency measure to contain the chaos caused by reckless trade policies. This is what happens when economic strategy is guided by ego instead of logic. Trump promised his tariffs would bring foreign nations to their knees. Instead, he has dragged the global economy to the brink of crisis and left America's own central bank scrambling to prevent a meltdown. The question now is to whether the Fed will cut rates. It's whether monetary policy can continue to offset the damage of Trump's reckless fiscal agenda. Judging by today's volatility, the answer looks increasingly doubtful.